August 7th, 1944, 0230 hours, east of Mortain, Normandy. Through the pre-dawn mist rolling across the Say River Valley, General-Lieutenant Heinrich Freiherr von Lüttwitz watched his panzer columns begin their thrust westward. 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, 2nd Panzer Division. Elements of 116th Panzer Division, over 200 tanks committed to Operation Lüttich, Hitler's desperate gamble to cut off the American breakthrough. Within minutes, the counter-offensive achieved tactical surprise. German armour smashed through positions of the American 30th Infantry Division, capturing the town of Mortain. Von Lüttwitz allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Americans, caught unprepared, were falling back. The corridor to Avranches lay open. Then, at 0700 hours, the fog lifted. What happened next would fundamentally alter every German officer's understanding of American warfare. Not the tanks that arrived, not the aircraft that swarmed overhead after dawn, but something far more terrifying, the instantaneous, overwhelming, mathematically precise response of American artillery. Within 4 minutes of the first radio call from Hill 314, where surrounded American observers still maintained their position, American guns began firing. Not in sequence, not in the rolling barrages that military doctrine had prescribed for decades, but in coordinated salvos that arrived from dozens of batteries simultaneously, converging on German columns with a precision that seemed impossible. By nightfall on August 7th, of the 70 German tanks estimated to have made the original penetration, only 30 remained operational. By the morning of August 8th, that number had fallen to 25. The counter-offensive that Hitler had insisted would cut the Americans off at Avranches had been obliterated in 36 hours. The weapon that destroyed Lüttich wasn't a wonder weapon or technological breakthrough. It was something the German military establishment found even more incomprehensible: industrial organization applied to the ancient art of artillery. The Americans weren't just firing more shells. They had transformed ammunition expenditure itself into a devastating tactical doctrine. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. German officers had a word for American artillery tactics: Materialverschwendung, material waste. The assessment carried professional disdain. German military doctrine, refined through centuries of Prussian tradition, emphasized efficiency, precision, economy of force. Every shell fired should serve a calculated purpose. Artillery was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. American artillery doctrine appeared to violate every principle of rational warfare. Forward observers called for fire on suspected positions. Battalions responded to reports of small enemy units. Harassment fire continued throughout the night on empty roads. Concentrations were fired on single vehicles. The expenditure seemed reckless, profligate, wasteful. Colonel General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff of the Wehrmacht High Command, summarized German professional opinion in a September 1944 assessment. The Americans possess unlimited ammunition and fire it with abandon at any target, real or imagined. This represents not superior tactics but industrial excess, compensating for tactical mediocrity. This judgment, shared throughout the Wehrmacht officer corps, contained a fundamental miscalculation. German professionals confused tactical philosophy with tactical incapacity. They believed American profligacy with ammunition reflected poor fire discipline and inadequate training. What they failed to grasp was that American artillery doctrine represented a conscious, calculated strategy based on unprecedented industrial capacity. The United States had made a deliberate choice. Rather than conserving ammunition through careful targeting, American doctrine maximized the use of the nation's single greatest advantage: the ability to produce and deliver ammunition in quantities that made conservation irrelevant. To understand the scale of American ammunition production, one must first comprehend how completely it dwarfed anything the Wehrmacht had encountered. By 1944, American factories were producing artillery ammunition at rates that would have seemed fantastic to military planners of any previous era. Monthly production of 155mm howitzer ammunition alone exceeded 500,000 rounds by late 1943. This represented more shells of a single caliber than Germany produced across all artillery types in an average month. 105mm ammunition, the workhorse of American divisional artillery, was manufactured at even higher rates, over 700,000 rounds monthly by mid-1944. The total tonnage told an even more staggering story. By 1944, the United States was producing approximately 11 million tons of artillery ammunition annually. For comparison, Germany's total ammunition production across all types artillery, small arms, bombs, reached approximately 3 million tons at its 1944 peak. But production capacity meant nothing without the ability to deliver ammunition to the guns. Here, American logistical superiority became even more pronounced. The U.S. Army had constructed a supply system of almost incomprehensible scale. Liberty ships crossed the Atlantic, carrying thousands of tons of ammunition per voyage. The Red Ball Express truck convoys, operating from Normandy beaches to forward positions, delivered over 12,000 tons of supplies daily at peak capacity. Each American infantry division required between 353 and 658 tons of ammunition daily during offensive operations, according to official logistics planning documents. An armored division consumed between 436 and 832 tons daily. These weren't theoretical allocations, they were regularly exceeded in actual combat. The Germans, struggling with chronic fuel shortages and disrupted rail networks, could not comprehend this logistical abundance. A German infantry division considered itself well supplied with 80 tons of all supplies daily during heavy combat. American divisions were firing more ammunition than German divisions received in total supplies. The ammunition itself reflected American industrial philosophy. Every shell, regardless of which of dozens of factories produced it, met exacting specifications. A 105mm shell, manufactured in Pennsylvania, performed identically to one made in California. This standardization, achieved through mass production techniques that sacrificed theoretical optimization for practical consistency, enabled the coordinated fire missions that characterized American artillery. German ammunition production, increasingly dispersed to avoid Allied bombing and increasingly reliant on slave labor, could not achieve such consistency. German artillery officers had to test-fire new ammunition batches to determine actual ballistic characteristics. American gunners could assume their shells would perform exactly to specification, a critical advantage for the rapid-fire direction calculations that time-on-target missions required. Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy beginning July 25, 1944, provided the first massive demonstration of American ammunition expenditure doctrine. General Omar Bradley had concentrated the largest artillery force yet, assembled by the U.S. Army in Europe, over 1,000 tubes, ranging from 105mm howitzers to 8-inch guns. The ammunition allocation for Operation Cobra totaled 170,000 rounds, 140,000 for 7th Corps, 27,000 for 8th Corps, with additional allocations for supporting units. This represented more ammunition than the entire German 7th Army possessed for all its artillery west of the Seine River. The barrage commenced at 9:38 on July 25, immediately following the massive aerial bombardment that had already stunned German defenders. Every American gun within range fired in coordinated salvos. The target area, a rectangle roughly 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep south of the Saint-Lô-Perriers Road, received concentrated devastation that exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had experienced in the West. Panzer Lehr Division, bearing the brunt of the attack, essentially ceased to exist as a combat formation. General Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the division, reported to Field Marshal Günther von Kluge his famous assessment: "My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numbed." Bayerlein's report included a detail that would resonate through Wehrmacht headquarters. The American artillery hadn't fired in traditional barrage patterns. Instead of sustained bombardment that permitted troops to take cover, then emerge when fire lifted, The Americans delivered precise concentrations at specific moments, then fell silent, then struck again with no discernible pattern. German troops couldn't adapt to the rhythm because there was no rhythm. Forward observers directed fire on any target of opportunity. Batteries responded within minutes. The fire came in overwhelming concentration, then stopped, leaving defenders uncertain whether to remain in battered positions or attempt withdrawal under potential observation. What German officers perceived as wasteful, indiscriminate fire was actually a carefully orchestrated system. Every American artillery battalion operated with a fire direction center, essentially a mathematical calculating center, where trained personnel used firing tables, slide rules, and graphical firing boards to compute firing solutions for multiple batteries simultaneously. The FDC concept, pioneered at Fort Sill in the 1930s and perfected in combat, represented a revolutionary approach to artillery. Rather than individual battery commanders deciding when and where to fire, centralized fire direction allowed coordinated responses to observer requests. A single forward observer could call upon entire artillery groups, even corps-level assets. This system required extensive communication infrastructure. A typical American infantry division in Normandy operated more radio sets than an entire German corps possessed in 1940. The 1st Infantry Division alone operated over 900 radio sets by August 1944. Every artillery battery had multiple redundant communication systems: wire, radio, and messenger. German formations, struggling with chronic radio shortages and increasingly dependent on telephone lines vulnerable to artillery fire, could not achieve such coordination. German artillery doctrine emphasized rapid concentration and displacement, moving guns quickly to mass fires, then relocating before counter-battery fire arrived. The system worked well when ammunition was scarce, and every shell had to count. American doctrine turned this paradigm on its head. Why move guns to concentrate their fire when you could simply direct fire from dispersed positions through centralized coordination? American batteries didn't need to be physically concentrated to achieve concentrated effect. Guns spread over 20 miles of front could deliver their shells to a single point concurrently. The mathematical precision underlying this capability represented another dimension of American superiority. To make shells from different guns arrive simultaneously at a target required knowing exact battery locations, precise distance to target, muzzle velocity of each gun type, weight and aerodynamic characteristics of each shell type, wind speed and direction at various altitudes, air temperature and density, and even Earth's rotation for long-range fire. Americans had developed graphical computation tools, the graphical firing table and graphical sight table that allowed rapid calculation of these complex problems. German artillery, still relying on conventional firing tables and individual battery calculations, couldn't match this speed. More critically, they couldn't match the standardization of ammunition that made rapid calculation practical. The German counteroffensive at Mortain provided devastating proof of American artillery's defensive capabilities. When Operation Lüttich began at midnight on August 7th, surrounded American observers on Hill, 314 immediately called for fire. The response stunned German commanders. The 30th Infantry Division alone fired time-on-target missions from 7 separate artillery battalions throughout the night. Each mission delivered instantaneous devastation on German assembly areas, approach routes, and command posts. Concentrated firepower created what German survivors described as walls of steel that made advance impossible. Lieutenant Charles Bartz and Lieutenant Robert Weiss, forward observers with the 230th Field Artillery Battalion, directed fire from their vantage point atop Hill 314. Despite being surrounded and cut off, with dwindling supplies and no hope of immediate relief, they maintained radio contact with their battalion and called in fire missions throughout the siege. The historical record documents their impact with precision. On August 7th alone, fire directed from Hill 314 destroyed or disabled over 40 German armoured vehicles, disrupted multiple infantry attacks, and prevented German forces from consolidating their initial gains. This from 2 officers with a radio, directing fire from batteries miles away. The logistical effort supporting Mortain operations demonstrated American supply capabilities. Despite the German breakthrough threatening supply lines, American ammunition trucks continued running to battery positions throughout the battle. The 230th Field Artillery Battalion, providing crucial support to the surrounded troops on Hill 314, never experienced ammunition shortages. When medical supplies for the surrounded troops couldn't be delivered by air, the battalion improvised, firing medical supplies and blood plasma packed into empty shell casings. This innovation, using artillery shells as supply containers, would have been impossible in any army concerned with conserving ammunition. The Americans could afford to fire shells for purposes other than killing the enemy because they had shells to spare. By dawn on August 8th, Field Marshal Gunther von Klug reported to Hitler that continuation of the offensive was impossible against such artillery superiority. The assessment wasn't about numbers of guns. German forces had encountered Soviet artillery concentrations that exceeded American gun densities. What made American artillery unstoppable was the combination of unlimited ammunition, instant communication, centralized fire direction, and trained personnel executing a doctrine designed around industrial abundance rather than scarcity. The Hürtgen Forest Campaign, September through December 1944, revealed that American ammunition expenditure remained devastating even in terrain theoretically favorable to the defense. The dense woods, Germans believed, would neutralize American artillery superiority. Trees would block observation. The forest canopy would prevent aerial coordination. Rugged terrain would restrict ammunition delivery. Every assumption proved wrong. The 4th Infantry Division, attacking through the forest in November 1944, developed tree-burst missions timing shells to detonate in the forest canopy. Mixed high-explosive and white phosphorus rounds created what survivors described as instant hell. Wood splinters driven downward, like spears mixed with burning phosphorus that ignited the forest floor. On November 6th, the 28th Infantry Division called for a concentrated mission on German strongpoints in woods near Schmidt. 12 battalions, 144 guns fired into a 500-meter square area, delivering over 3,000 shells in 30 seconds. German positions that had held for weeks were obliterated in half a minute. The scale of fire stunned even veteran Wehrmacht troops. The German 28th Infantry Division, defending in the Hürtgen Forest, reported that American artillery fire exceeded in intensity anything encountered on the Eastern Front. Medical services documented unprecedented rates of what they termed artillery-induced trauma, soldiers who remained functional after conventional bombardments, but were psychologically broken by the coordinated devastation. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The ammunition expenditure during the Hürtgen Forest fighting illustrated American doctrine at its most extreme. During the 16 days of combat from November 16th through December 3rd, the 22nd Infantry Regiment, 4th Division, advanced 6,000 yards, approximately 300 yards daily. The cost, 2,678 casualties. But the artillery fired to support this advance exceeded anything previous military planning would have considered reasonable. Fire direction records show the regiment called for over 1,500 separate fire missions during those 18 days, more than 80 missions daily. Each mission typically involved multiple batteries, firing dozens to hundreds of rounds. The total ammunition expenditure supporting the 4th Division's operations in the Hürtgen Forest during November exceeded 50,000 tons. This represented more artillery ammunition than Germany allocated to entire army groups for months-long campaigns. The Americans were firing this tonnage to advance a single division a few miles through wooded terrain. German officers reviewing captured American fire direction records expressed professional horror. One German artillery commander, captured near Kommerscheid, examined American ammunition expenditure reports and insisted they must be falsified. No military force, he argued, could possibly maintain such rates of fire. The ammunition requirements alone would overwhelm any conceivable supply system. He was informed that the records were entirely accurate. His response was recorded by his interrogators. This is industrial production with guns attached. The observation contained profound insight. American success in World War II rested fundamentally on treating warfare as an industrial problem. The same organizational capabilities that allowed Detroit to produce a bomber every hour enabled American artillery to coordinate hundreds of guns, firing tens of thousands of shells with businesslike efficiency. The Falaise Pocket encirclement in August 1944 provided the most concentrated demonstration of American artillery's systematic destructive capacity. As German forces struggled to escape through the narrowing gap near Chambois, American artillery delivered continuous time-on-target missions on every escape route. On August 17th alone, American artillery executed documented missions on the Trun-Chambois road at 30-minute intervals throughout daylight hours. Each mission involved 10 to 15 batteries, delivering coordinated devastation on German columns attempting to flee. General Hans Eberbach, commanding the remnants of Panzer Group West, reported that concentrated artillery fire made it impossible to bring up reserves or evacuate the wounded. The road through Falaise became known as the Corridor of Death. Destroyed vehicles, dead horses, and abandoned equipment created obstacles that slowed movement, making subsequent units even more vulnerable to artillery strikes. The systematic nature of the bombardment reflected American doctrine. Forward observers had pre-registered coordinates for every likely route. When German columns appeared, fire missions were called and executed within minutes. By August 21st, when the pocket finally closed, 50,000 German soldiers had been captured and 10,000 killed. Artillery accounted for the majority of casualties. Post-battle surveys conducted by American ordnance units counted over 1,500 destroyed vehicles within the pocket. The vast majority showed damage consistent with artillery fire rather than aerial bombardment. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate casualties. Wehrmacht medical services documented that survivors of the Falaise bombardment exhibited specific trauma patterns different from those observed in troops subjected to sustained Eastern Front combat. The report, captured at German 7th Army headquarters, described soldiers who became paralyzed at the sound of vehicle engines, having associated mechanical sounds with the arrival of artillery fire. German attempts to cross the Seine River in late August demonstrated that even natural obstacles offered no respite from American artillery. Forward observers had infiltrated ahead of main forces, establishing positions overlooking every potential crossing site. At Vernon, Rouen, and Mantes, German attempts to establish pontoon bridges were met with immediate fire responses. The precision was such that bridges were destroyed while still under construction, often with engineer units still working on them. At Mantes on August 26th, German engineers of the 7th Army attempted to construct a pontoon bridge under cover of darkness. American observers detected the activity through sound. Within 6 minutes, artillery fire began arriving on the construction site. The engineers persisted, believing the initial fire was harassing fire that would cease. Instead, the bombardment intensified. Fire direction records show that 5 separate battalions were directed onto the bridge site over the next 40 minutes, firing over 800 rounds. The bridge construction was abandoned. 23 German engineer bodies were recovered from the Seine the following day. This pattern repeated at every attempted crossing. German units began refusing to cross in daylight, creating massive traffic jams on the western banks that became targets for additional missions. The systematic destruction of crossing attempts through precisely timed artillery demonstrated the technique's flexibility beyond traditional battlefield applications. By December 1944, Americans had integrated new technologies that made artillery even more devastating. The VT, or variable time fuse, commonly called the proximity fuse, was first used in ground artillery during the Battle of the Bulge. These fuses detonated shells at optimal height above ground for maximum fragment dispersion. When proximity-fused shells were incorporated into time-on-target barrages from December onward, lethality increased dramatically. Shells detonating at optimal height created uniform patterns of destruction that no foxhole or slit trench could protect against. Over 22 million proximity fuses were produced during the war, with the majority going to artillery rather than anti-aircraft use. The Germans initially believed Americans had developed a new weapon entirely. Intelligence reports speculated about controlled aerial mines or time-delay cluster munitions. The truth that it was simply precise timing combined with proximity fuses seemed too simple for such devastating effect. One captured German artillery officer, when shown a proximity fuse, reportedly remarked, "We spent years developing rockets and jet aircraft. You made a better artillery shell. You understood the war better than we did." The Battle of the Bulge, beginning December 16, 1944, tested American artillery doctrine under the most adverse conditions. Caught by surprise, pushed back, operating in the worst winter weather in decades, American forces nevertheless demonstrated that their artillery system remained decisive. On December 19th, as 2nd Panzer Division approached Dinant, forward observers from 3rd Armoured Division called for emergency fire support. Within 4 minutes, 8 battalions had calculated firing solutions. The resulting barrage caught the German column in march formation, destroying the lead battalion within 60 seconds. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces called for missions danger close to their own positions, devastating German assault formations attempting to breach the perimeter. The ability to mass fires quickly through coordinated fire direction proved crucial in containing German penetrations. Despite ammunition shortages affecting other operations, artillery units at Bastogne never ran critically low, the apparent contradiction ammunition shortages elsewhere, while Bastogne units fired freely illustrated American logistics priorities. Ammunition was distributed based on tactical necessity rather than equal allocation. Units in contact with the enemy received priority. This flexible distribution system, enabled by extensive transportation networks and centralized supply management, represented another dimension of American organizational superiority. German forces attacking at Bastogne discovered that even when they achieved local numerical superiority, American artillery negated their advantage. The 130th Panzer Division, attacking from the south on December 26th, encountered concentrated fire from the 10th Armoured Division's artillery. Within 30 minutes, the attack had stalled with heavy casualties. A German after-action report captured in January described the experience. "We advanced with approximately 80 armoured vehicles and 500 infantry. American artillery responded instantly. The fire was so intense and accurate that our attack dissolved before reaching American positions. We estimate losing 40% of our force before a single shot was fired in direct combat." This represented the ultimate expression of American artillery doctrine, preventing enemy forces from ever engaging in the close combat where German tactical superiority might have proven decisive. By expending ammunition freely on any detected enemy concentration, American artillery transformed the battlefield into a killing zone, where movement itself became suicidal. The Rhine crossing operations of March 1945 demonstrated American artillery capabilities at their absolute zenith. The Westfall crossing on March 24th involved the largest artillery preparation of the Western European War. The Allies concentrated 4,000 guns, with 270 American pieces participating. The opening bombardment lasted 4 hours, with coordinated time on target strikes at 15-minute intervals. Each strike involved hundreds of guns achieving unified impact across kilometer-wide target areas. The scale exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had delivered, even during the largest Eastern Front operations. In preparation for the crossing, American artillery fired over 65,000 tons of ammunition in March 1945 alone. German defenders reported that bombardment intensity was such that concussion alone caused casualties, soldiers found dead without visible wounds, killed by blast overpressure that ruptured internal organs. At Oppenheim, where Patton's Third Army crossed on March 22nd, the supporting barrage involved 33 battalions over 400 guns, firing in perfect coordination. The barrage lasted 60 seconds and delivered 10,000 shells onto German positions. German commanders reported that entire battalions simply ceased to exist, with no survivors to report what had happened. The three-day preparation for major Rhine crossings, March 22nd through 24th, consumed approximately 120,000 tons of artillery ammunition. For perspective, this exceeded Germany's total ammunition production across all types for an average month by late war. The Americans fired in 3 days what Germany produced in 4 to 5 weeks. What German officers gradually recognized was that American artillery represented the application of industrial methods to warfare in their purest form. The same principles enabling Detroit to produce a bomber every hour enabled American artillery to coordinate hundreds of guns, firing tens of thousands of shells with assembly line efficiency. This industrial approach extended beyond the battlefield. American factories produced artillery shells in staggering quantities, over 8 million rounds monthly by late 1944. The transportation system delivered these shells from ports to firing batteries in continuous flow. Communication networks coordinated this vast enterprise with business-like efficiency supply officers, tracking ammunition stocks with the same methods retail chains used for inventory management. The psychological impact of American ammunition expenditure proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Wehrmacht medical services documented unprecedented rates of combat neurosis specifically linked to American artillery. Veterans who had endured hours-long Soviet barrages on the Eastern Front were broken by American bombardments. The difference wasn't duration, but unpredictability. Soviet artillery typically announced major operations with massive preparatory barrages, terrifying but comprehensible. Soldiers could mentally prepare. American artillery arrived without warning, in overwhelming concentration, then stopped, leaving survivors uncertain whether bombardment had ended or merely paused. German field hospitals reported soldiers exhibiting unique symptoms after experiencing American artillery: paralysis triggered by sudden sounds, inability to process multiple stimuli, profound fear of mechanical noises. Unlike traditional shell shock, which might improve with rest, these symptoms persisted even after evacuation to rear areas. A Wehrmacht medical report from December 1944 described the syndrome. Soldiers subjected to American concentrated fire exhibit psychological profiles distinct from those experiencing conventional bombardment. The instantaneous nature of American fire removes all psychological coping mechanisms. There is no escalation permitting mental preparation, no rhythm to anticipate, no pattern to recognize. The result is complete psychological collapse in otherwise reliable troops. Fritz Bayerlein's assessment became the most quoted German description of American artillery's effect. "My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numbed." That final category, numbed, represented soldiers who were physically uninjured but psychologically destroyed, unable to function in combat. General Hans Eberbach provided another crucial testimony. The fire curtain was so dense that it was impossible to bring up reserves or evacuate the wounded. The Americans have developed a system of artillery concentration that exceeds anything we imagined possible. This is not a superior tactic. This is industrial capacity applied to military problems with no concern for cost. Captured documents from Wehrmacht headquarters revealed desperate attempts to counter American artillery capabilities. A report from the Weapons Testing Office concluded, American coordinated fire technique represents technological superiority in computational devices and communication integration. No effective countermeasure exists with current German capabilities. The only defense is dispersal and concealment, accepting that concentrated operations will draw immediate, devastating fire. German attempts to replicate American time-on-target techniques revealed systemic disadvantages. They understood the mathematics and could calculate time of flight, but they lacked everything else: standardized ammunition, reliable communications, trained personnel, and the industrial foundation that made American coordinated fire possible. The largest German attempt at coordinated fire during the Nordwind offensive in January 1945 involved 8 batteries achieving impact dispersion over 12 seconds, far from American precision, where dozens of batteries could achieve simultaneous impact within fractions of a second. As American forces drove into Germany in early 1945, artillery barrages became routine preliminaries to any attack. At Cologne, the garrison commander surrendered after experiencing a single 60-second barrage on March 5th, reporting that further resistance was militarily pointless against such artillery superiority. The pattern repeated across the collapsing Reich. Commanders who had fought tenaciously for years capitulated after brief bombardments. The psychological effect had become so pronounced that often the mere threat of coordinated fire prompted surrender. Radio intercepts documented German officers warning their superiors that troops would not hold positions under American artillery. Fire. Soviet observers studied American artillery techniques with intense interest. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, after touring American positions in April 1945, reportedly commented, "Your artillery fires in 1 hour, what ours fires in 1 day. But you also deliver ammunition in 1 hour, what takes us 1 day. The second is more impressive than the first." The British, despite being allies, were equally impressed. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery wrote in his memoirs, "American artillery demonstrated that warfare had become a matter of industrial and organizational superiority. Traditional military virtues, courage, discipline, and tactical skill became secondary to systematic application of overwhelming firepower." The cumulative statistics of American artillery ammunition expenditure told a story that German military professionals found almost impossible to accept. From D-Day through VE Day, American forces in Europe fired approximately 2.7 million tons of artillery ammunition. This represented more ammunition than Germany produced across all munition types during the entire war. Breaking down by major operations: Normandy Campaign, June through July, 1944, approximately 450,000 tons. Operation Cobra alone, 170,000 rounds, representing approximately 12,000 tons in 1 week. The Seine crossings, August 1944, approximately 90,000 tons. The Siegfried Line Campaign, September through December 1944, approximately 800,000 tons. The Battle of the Bulge, December 1944 through January 1945, approximately 200,000 tons. The Rhine crossings and final offensives, January through May 1945, approximately 1.1 million tons. These numbers exceeded the total artillery ammunition expenditure of all Central Powers during World War I. The Americans were firing in 11 months of European operations, more ammunition than had been fired in 4 years of the previous World War. The industrial capacity enabling this expenditure represented American economic mobilization at its most impressive. Peak production of artillery ammunition reached 850,000 tons monthly by early 1945. This production was distributed across hundreds of factories, employing hundreds of thousands of workers, many of them women who had entered industrial work for the first time. The Waterbury Arsenal alone produced over 2 million rounds of 105mm ammunition monthly by 1944. Rock Island Arsenal produced similar quantities. These were just 2 of dozens of facilities, mass-producing standardized ammunition to identical specifications, enabling the coordinated fire missions that German artillery, with its dispersed and increasingly degraded production, could never match. The transportation system, moving this, ammunition from factories to battlefields, represented another dimension of organizational superiority. Over 12 million tons of ammunition were shipped to European theatre of operations during the war. This required thousands of Liberty ship voyages, millions of truck miles of transportation, elaborate depot systems, and sophisticated inventory management. German logistics officers, when shown American ammunition depot operations after the war, expressed professional disbelief. One colonel, touring a captured American ammunition depot near Liège containing over 40,000 tons of various calibers, reportedly said, "This single depot contains more ammunition than our entire 7th Army possessed at any time after July 1944. You didn't defeat us with better soldiers. You defeated us with better supply sergeants." The assessment contained profound truth. American victory in World War II rested fundamentally on logistics, the unglamorous work of producing, transporting, storing, and distributing the material of war in quantities that overwhelmed any opponent. Artillery ammunition expenditure represented this capability in its most visible form. What German officers termed wasteful was actually highly efficient when measured against the strategic objective, winning the war as quickly as possible with minimum friendly casualties. Every shell fired on suspected enemy positions reduced risk to American infantry. Every barrage that broke German defensive positions saved American lives. The economic calculation was straightforward. Artillery shells were cheap compared to soldiers. A 105mm round cost approximately $12 to produce. Training and equipping an infantry replacement cost thousands of dollars. More importantly, the replacement was an American citizen whose loss would be felt by families and communities across the nation. American commanders understood that they would be judged not just by victory, but by the cost of victory in American lives. Artillery ammunition expenditure, however, wasteful, it appeared to German professionals, represented the most cost-effective method of achieving victory. Fire shells, instead of sending soldiers into danger. Expend ammunition liberally, rather than conserve it for some theoretical future need. This philosophy pervaded American tactical doctrine. The official guidance for artillery forward observers emphasized, "It is better to expend ammunition on targets that may not exist than to fail to engage targets that do exist. Ammunition can be replaced. Dead soldiers cannot." The standing order at every level was, when in doubt, fire. If observers saw suspicious activity, call for fire. If scouts reported possible enemy positions, fire on them. If troops were advancing into an area, fire preparation fires first. The result was an artillery system that erred consistently on the side of excessive rather than insufficient fire. German tactical doctrine operated on the opposite principle: conservation of scarce resources. German artillery officers were trained to verify targets before committing ammunition. Fire missions required approval from senior officers. Harassing fire was minimized to preserve shells for defensive operations. This conservatism reflected Germany's strategic situation. Facing enemies on all sides with limited production capacity, Germany had to husband resources carefully. But the very carefulness that seemed professionally prudent proved tactically disastrous when facing an opponent unconstrained by ammunition scarcity. By late 1944, the contrast had become stark. American artillery fired on any target of opportunity. German artillery hoarded ammunition for emergencies, and when emergencies came, found themselves suppressed by American counter-battery fire before they could respond effectively. The mathematical certainty of American firepower superiority terrified German commanders, more than tactical defeat. They could counter superior generalship with clever tactics, offset numerical disadvantage with superior training. But they could not answer unlimited precision firepower, backed by infinite ammunition supply. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding Army Group B during the Ruhr encirclement, summarized the situation in his final message before suicide. "We have been defeated not by superior soldiers but by superior systems, not by better courage but by better coordination, not by tactical brilliance but by industrial efficiency, applied with mathematical precision to the ancient art of killing." The ultimate irony was that German military professionals, who prided themselves on understanding warfare scientifically, failed to recognize that the Americans had simply applied science more thoroughly. Where Germans saw waste, Americans saw optimization, maximizing the use of abundant resources to achieve decisive results. The story of German forces encountering American artillery ammunition expenditure marks a pivotal transformation in military history. Warfare evolved from an art practiced by warriors into a science executed by industrial systems. German soldiers, products of the world's most professional military tradition, found themselves overwhelmed not by superior soldiers, but by superior systems. The thunder that fell on German positions in 1944 and 1945 represented more than American firepower. It embodied the emergence of a new form of warfare, where victory belonged to those who could best organize and apply industrial power to military problems. The Wehrmacht was defeated not by better soldiers but by better systems, not by superior courage but by superior coordination, not by tactical brilliance but by industrial efficiency, applied with mathematical precision to the ancient art of artillery. American artillery ammunition expenditure, dismissed as wasteful by German professionals, shattered the entire conceptual framework of traditional military thinking. The coordinated fire that fell on German positions announced the arrival of a new age, where victory would belong to those who could best transform military operations into industrial processes. The echoes of that realization still resonate in military doctrine worldwide. Every modern military force, every coordinated military operation, every systematic application of firepower owes something to the revolution that American ammunition expenditure doctrine represented. The German soldiers who experienced it were witnesses to the birth of a new age in human conflict, where industrial organization would prove more powerful than martial tradition. In the age of industrial warfare, systems defeat soldiers, organization triumphs over courage, and coordinated logistics conquers all. The Germans learned this lesson under the overwhelming fire of American industrial warfare, made manifest in ammunition expenditure that seemed wasteful only to those who failed to understand that modern war is won not by conserving shells, but by firing them faster than the enemy can respond. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.